so I started live streaming. It's taking a little while, but.
Seems like Aiyoung needs to say something.
And I'm going to start recording.
Okay.
Aiyoung, you are muted. I'm unmuting you, Aiyoung. Just when, hang on, just one sec.
Okay, we're live.
Okay, hang on.
Lower down the volume.
평양 지나 신의주 저 넓은 광야로 올 거야 모두 함께 경의선 타고 보고 싶은 내 형제 온 세상 사람들 오고 가는 경의선 사랑이 피고 오고 가는 경의선 평화가 넘쳐 만백년 분단의 장벽을 걷고 통일의 새날을 여네 서울에서 만나요 경의선 기차 타고 평양에서 만나요 경의선 타고 아 경의선 통일의 철길 따라 우리 함께 만나요 오고 가는 경의선 사랑이 피고 오고 가는 경의선 평화가 넘쳐 반백년 분단의 을 걷고 통일의 새날을 여네 서울에서 만나요 경의선 기차 타고 평양에서 만나요 경의선 타고 아 경의선 통일의 철길 따라 우리 함께 만나요 북경에서 만나요 경의선 기차 타고 런던에서 만나요 경의선 타고 아 경의선 통일의 철길 따라 우리 함께 만나요 서울에서 만나요 경의선 기차 타고 평양에서 만나요 경의선 타고 아 경의선 통일의 철길 따라 우리 함께 만나요 갈 거야 모두 함께 경의선 타고 평양 지나 신의주 저 넓은 광야로 올 거야 모두 함께 경의선 타고 보고 싶은 내 형제 온 세상 사람들 오고 가는 경의선 사랑이 피고 오고 가는 경의선 평화가 넘쳐 경의선 사랑이 피고
오고 가는 경의선 평화가 넘쳐
반백년 분단의 장벽을 걷고
통일의 새날을 여네
서울에서 만나요 경의선 기차 타고 평양에서 만나요 경의선 타고 아 경의선 통일의 철길 따라 우리 함께 만나요 북경에서 만나요 경의선 기차 타고 런던에서 만나요 경의선 타고 아 경의선 통일의 철길 따라 우리 함께 만나요 서울에서 만나요 경의선 기차 타고 평양에서 만나요 경의선 타고 아 경의선 통일의 철길 따라 우리 함께 만나요
Okay, hello and welcome everyone. Welcome to Armistice for Peace, Korean American Women Speak on 70 Years of the Korean War. We're so glad that you have all taken the time to join us tonight. This event is hosted by Korea Peace Network, Korea Peace Now Grassroots Network, and Peace Treaty Now. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. My name is Mi Jin. I will be your MC for this evening. And we have simultaneous interpretation in Korean that is happening. Right now, there is a link in the, or there should be information in the chat if you need it. And we also are streaming this live on YouTube, in addition to having a Zoom room that currently is filling up with folks. If folks can mute themselves, folks who are in the Zoom room can just mute themselves to make sure that we can hear all of our speakers clearly. And please enter in the chat where you are joining into this meeting from. Just in case there is, we are living in an era of, you know, a lot of things happening on the internet, people with a lot of bad intentions. And so just in case there is some type of issue that we have with the Zoom, everyone will be asked to just log off immediately, and we will all log back in using the same link. And our tech team will make sure that they're being selective about only admitting folks who we know from the waiting room. We will also be doing a group picture at the end, so we hope you'll stay with us for the entire event. And it looks like folks are saying in the chat, we have a lot of folks calling in from New York City, from California, from Seoul, Korea, from Virginia, Washington, DC, Maryland, New Jersey. Who am I missing? Some upstate New Yorkers as well, more from Virginia, another from Incheon in Korea, Minneapolis. Hi, Sharon. Some more from California, from Philadelphia, from Taebaek, South Korea, California, occupied Lenape land, New York City, upstate, Cool. So we have quite a few: New York and California, Wisconsin. All right. So I just want to talk a little. Thank you all for sharing. Please continue to share. Hyun just dropped in the chat also a sign that we encourage folks to use and put as their backdrop for this event, if you have that ability. And Hyun, just read Hyun's instructions in the chat. So today's event, we are here because on July 27th, 1953, an armistice was signed. 70 years later, we are having this to talk about the human cost of the unresolved war, because that is a war that has not ended. I want to have us open the conversation by introducing a poet. Sekyo Nam Haynes is a bilingual poet and visual artist who has both original poetry and also translations of Korean poetry that have appeared in several publications recently. Please join me in welcoming Sekyo, who will be sharing a poem with us today in both English and Korean. So Sekyo.
Sorry, this is Echo. Can Kelly make me a co-host?
Sure, hold on.
All right, just so to flow us through, we're really grateful to have Sekyo, and a lot of, art is a part of this. We'll have a panel discussion later. Really excited about other important speakers who are also joining us today. And are we ready with Sekyo's feature? There she is. Oh, Sekyo, you're muted. Can you unmute yourself? You're muted. You're still muted. Can someone from our tech team help Sekyo out? Sekyo, you're muted. There you
Okay,
go.
I got it now.
Good.
Thank you.
No problem.
All right. Thank you for letting me read my poem. Snow brings winter memory. Day like this, snowing outside, when everything is hushed and quiet, that one might think even the clocks have stopped ticking. A crack opens, a moment shifting to another, back to my childhood with a grandmother. It was a day like this, snowing outside. Grandmother stops her mending needle, turns her head toward a small square lookout glass in the rice paper stretched door, and she looks. As she turns her head back to pick up the needle and the old sock she was mending, she says, "Today is the day your second cousin once removed was born, and it was snowing like this." As if I asked her, he must be 35 today. He was 2 years older than your uncle who is gone far away. I only knew him by this name. The uncle who is gone far away was already gone by the time I became old enough to know anything. Far, somewhere so far. Every time I tried to imagine that farness, I only saw a fog-covered horizon. For a child, it was also a place where deep sighs from grown-ups would get collected, at a place where my grandmother's misty eyes were held for the longest time, and where family squabbles come to an abrupt end. like a slow emerging Polaroid. That unfathomable distance gave way to a stark picture, a stiffly starched clarity in a history book of a place in north, not far at all from us. No more than 2.5 miles of a distance beyond the 38th parallel, there lies the land we called far away. This is in Korean. Snow. 눈이 가져오는 겨울의 기억. 오늘 같은 날 창밖에는 눈이 내리고 사위는 온통 침묵으로 덮여 벽에 걸린 시계마저도 멈춰 버린 듯이 고요한 순간. 이 순간 어디에선가 틈이 열리고 내 기억은 어리던 시절 할머니 곁으로 돌아간다. 오늘도 그날도 오늘같이 창밖에는 눈이 내린다. 할머니는 하시던 바느질을 멈추시고 창호지가 발린 격자문에 붙어있는 조그마한 사각유리에 당신의 얼굴을 가까이 대며 밖을 내다보신다. 다시 꿰매던 낡은 양만을 집어 드시며 나에게 말하신다. 오늘이 네 조정 오빠가 태어난 날이구나. 그때도 오늘같이 눈이 내렸지. 내가 물었다는 듯이 할머니는 계속하신다. 올해로 35이구나. 멀리 간 네 아재보다 2살이 많으니까. 나는 숙부를 오직 이 이름으로만 알고 있었다. 내가 철이 들었을 때 이미 멀리 가신 아재는 벌써 멀리 가신 지 오랜 후였다. 먼 어느 그곳, 멀다는 그곳을 생각해 볼 때마다 나에게는 안개 자욱한 지평선 밖에는 보이는 게 없었다. 어린 나에게 그곳은 어른들의 한숨과 탄식이 모여 쌓이던 곳, 할머니의 촉촉한 눈매가 허공을 향해 오랫동안 머물던 곳, 또 그곳은 가족들의 옥신각신마저 멈추어 버리던 곳, 천천히 현상되는 폴라로이드처럼 불가해한 그곳은 서슬퍼런 영상으로 내 앞에 있다. 살을 벨듯 뻣뻣이 풀맥인 역사책에 서슬러 이곳에서 멀지도 않은 곳 2.5마일이 채 넘지 않는 분단의 간격 그 38선 너머를 우리는 그토록 먼 곳이라고 불렀다.
Thank you so much, Segyo, for the beautiful poems. We really appreciate it. And folks, please, this is definitely, we want to give feedback. We know that not everyone can speak, but please do feel free to use the chat if you are in the Zoom and if you are on the YouTube live to also make use of the commentary so that Segyo can feel your love and appreciation and so can the rest of the speakers. So thank you. So I'm going to move us into the rest of the program. I wanted to also note that we have over 120 people on Zoom in this room and others also joining us on YouTube Live. So we have a really nice crowd with us tonight in this digital space. I also want to make my own personal connection. As an adoptee, the reason that I'm here tonight is because the unending war impacts me because of the separation that I went through as a Korean adoptee for 28 years from my Korean family. That is obviously different, very different from families who've been separated for decades longer. And also it is yet another human cost of the war that has not ended. So I am honored to introduce Congresswoman Grace Meng from Queens, New York, where I am also calling in from tonight. Grace Meng is the first Asian American member of Congress from New York State and also the first woman Congress member from Queens since Geraldine Ferraro. She is a vocal advocate for reuniting families separated due to the unresolved Korean War. Her legislation, the Divided Families Reunification Act, which seeks to reunite Korean American families with loved ones in North Korea, passed the House in March and is pending in the Senate. So please join me in welcoming Representative Grace Meng.
Oh, thank you so much, Mijin, and thank you, Segyo, for that amazing and heartfelt poem. Thank you, Mijin, for the introduction, and to all of you, thank you for allowing me to join you here tonight. I wish we could be together in person to commemorate this solemn anniversary, but in the meantime, I'm honored to join all of you. I hope you're all staying safe. As you all know, 70 years ago, millions of Koreans were plunged into a harrowing war that brought about misery. And the war has been frozen by an armistice agreement signed on July 27, 1953, that persists to today. The unresolved status of the war continues to impact multiple generations of Korean Americans, particularly women, in myriad ways. All these years later, many survivors of the war are still taunted by their trauma, and younger generations who are responsible for their caregiving often internalize this unresolved grief. Many families have also lived with the pain of separation since their homeland was divided by an arbitrary border. For elderly individuals, the chance of a reunion with their loved ones grows less likely every single day. And for Korean Americans, this means that they are unable to see or visit their loved ones in North Korea, as they've not been permitted to participate in inter-Korean family reunions. And as long as the war remains unresolved, these scars will not heal. That's why, as Mijin mentioned, I'm proud to have authored the Divided Families Reunification Act, which passed the House earlier, and we're still waiting for it in the Senate. This bill would require the US State Department to engage with South Korea to ensure that Korean Americans can participate in these reunions. Today, with talks between the US and North Korea deadlocked, there is grave potential for renewed tension on the peninsula. And as we look to the future, all parties should remain committed to the noble goal of peace in Korea, armistice agreement with a permanent peace agreement. I am also honored 52, which calls for a formal end. 70 years has been way too long. May this be the last year that we commemorate the anniversary of the armistice. Let us end the war, reunite families, and start the healing for future generations. Thank you for allowing me to join with all of you tonight.
Thank you so much, Representative Grace Meng, for sharing with us and for being with us here tonight. I really appreciate your work. We are together, and so thank you. I also want to mention that Kim Schofield, who is a Georgia State representative, is also with us tonight. Thank you, Kim, for joining us, just giving a little shout out. And now we are going to move into our panel. I would like to introduce our moderator for tonight, Jiyeon Ye. Jiyeon is a history professor at Northwestern University and also a longtime activist for Korea Peace and Reunification. She's also part of the Korea Peace Now campaign in Chicago. So welcome, Jiyeon. Oh, Jiyeon, you're muted. Oh, does someone else have to unmute you? Oh, I see. Okay. I also want to give a big shout out to our tech team. We have a whole crew of folks who are helping with tech tonight. All right, I think you're good to go, Jiyeon.
Yes, we are. We are really fortunate today that 4 amazing women are sharing their stories with us. They include women with direct experience of war and women who have inherited family histories of war. All of them have lived under the structures of national division and unending war, but each has a unique personal perspective, and each approaches the issue of Korea peace and reunification on her own terms. It's a privilege to be able to hear their narratives and views, for in order to truly walk the road to peace, we must be able to encompass diverse and sometimes even contrasting experiences and perspectives. We will begin with Joy Lee Gebhart and continue with Minju Bae and Aiyoung Choi and conclude with Grace Choi. Before we hear their stories, each will briefly introduce herself. I ask all 4 panelists to unmute themselves now. Joy, would you like to begin?
Can you can you hear me? Hi. Hello.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Hi. Hi. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me this great program, and thank you for the take help. My name is Joy Lee Gebhart. My Korean name is Lee Bok-shin. I'm a former social science teacher, nurse, and a small business owner. And also I'm the owner of, founder of the nonprofit humanitarian organization called Healing. In 1950, I was separated from my family in Pyongyang, and I came to South Korea with a man who brought me to South Korea. 1956, I came to United States as a scholarship student. And I have a degree in political science. I live in Northern Virginia.
Jiyeon?
All right, who is, Jiyeon, who is next?
Looks like Jiyeon might be frozen.
Oh, okay.
The other panelists introduce themselves, please.
Yes, can Minju and then Aiyoung and then Grace introduce themselves without me in the middle?
Sorry, I wasn't able to unmute myself. Hi, I'm Minju Bae, and I'm also a historian. I'm currently sitting in New York where there's a terrible thunderstorm, so there might be some background noise. I'm a member of Nodotor and also a member of the New Jersey, New York chapter of Korea Peace Now. Thank you. Hi, were folks not able to hear me the first time?
No, we heard you.
Okay.
Aiyoung, is Aiyoung next? Okay, I'm gonna unmute Aiyoung. Okay, Aiyoung?
Oh,
Can-
thank you. Hi, I am unmuted now. Hi, my name is Aiyoung Choi, and I am with an amazing organization called Women Cross DMZ. Here in New York, I'm working and living and doing a couple of other things that are very, very dear to me, and that includes speaking up for justice and equality through supporting artists, and then fighting against violence against women in many different forms, specifically through the Coalition Against Trafficking in Women and with the Korean American Family Service Center. And I am very grateful to Representative Meng for all that she is doing for us, the women in this community, as well as the Korean issue that she has spent so much energy on. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Grace Choi. I am a co-founder of Regeneration Movement, a nonprofit that my husband Jong Dae and I have founded with a mission to empower global diasporas to be peacemakers. We're based in Atlanta, Georgia, but now I'm connecting in from South Korea, Seoul. I'm the eldest daughter in my family, married to a person who is the eldest son in the family. Some people here will understand what that means for Koreans. Growing up in the Korean family culture, my husband and I always had heavy responsibilities for continuing our family's legacy. Hope I can share more on that later. Thank you for having me, and I'm here to represent my voice as millennials. Thank you.
Okay.
Great. Thank you so much for the introductions, and we're apologies for the technical difficulties. From their introductions, you can already glimpse the unique character of each of our panelists. So let's continue directly to Joy's narrative. And please make sure to unmute Joy. Thank you.
Hello.
Yep, we can hear you, Joy.
All right. Okay. The photo, I don't know, you have seen it just a few minutes ago. The photo, my photo in my middle school uniform depicts myself standing in front of the Songbulsa Buddhist temple in Sanghae-do in April 1950. The Korean War broke out on June 25. I graduated from Sariwon Middle School on June 29. My mother was expected to attend my graduation, but was unable to as the train station had been bombed. After the graduation ceremony, I had to walk 75 miles to return home in Pyongyang. In December of the same year, 1950, my father's friends, Mr. Kim, came to Pyongyang looking for his daughter and wife in vain, and stopped by our house, allowed me to go with him to Seoul, as it may be safer there. He promised my mother to educate me and bring me back when the war was over. The day I left home with Mr. Kim, I kept looking back at my mother who stood outside our house, watching me leaving. I had a sinking feeling that it might be the last time I see her. Mr. Kim, who brought me to South Korea, passed away of a stroke 2 months later in Daegu. I was left alone, so on my own, I decided to enroll in ROK nursing school, VAC nursing school in 1951, January. After the nursing school, I attended Busan University, working 3-4 jobs at the same time. Then I came to the United States in 1956 with a scholarship. Since I came to the United States, the very first thing I did was I wrote a letter to my mother in Pyongyang. But the letter each time returned stamped undeliverable. However, in 1988, on the 38th year of my separation, I was able to find about my family and was able to travel to Pyongyang. My mother had passed away then, but I was able to reunite with my siblings. My brother and 3 sisters. The youngest one was 4 years old, and 8 and 10, because they no longer could recognize me, or I could recognize them at that time. Since 1970, I have owned and operated a small business while being actively engaged in human and peace activism. I'll close with a poem which expresses the sum of 70 years of separation from my family as a result of Korean War. The title is Minju Bae. I cry in night as I see my mother in my dream. She welcomes me. So you are home. You have been away for so long. I cry in night in my dream, for I couldn't be my mother as I wake. It was still, I go home every night. Though my home knows. I miss seeing my sisters and brothers and the dancers screaming. I miss my mothers, to whom I never. She said softly as I was leaving, right often. Soul is cold. Keep long riding.
Thank you so much, Joy, for sharing your experience and for that eloquent and lyrical poem. The division of Korea in 1945 and the subsequent war left thousands of families separated, and the majority of them have not been able to reconnect. There are so many separated families that it is not an exaggeration to say that virtually every Korean has a connection to one. The human and emotional toll of war and division is incalculable, and each individual has a story as moving and painful as the one that Joy so eloquently shared with us. It's a legacy passed down through the generations, and Minju's story, which we will hear next, is about how her family handled their particular legacy. Minju?
Hi, everyone. My Korean War story is a recovered set of memories from a lot of people, which have helped me to see how the war has also affected me. And together, all of these stories make up an intergenerational 70-year archive about the war's traumas and also my family's resilience. Many of my relatives' stories are painful, and frankly, they're not mine to tell, but they do inform my experience and political commitments. And so I'll try to tell it as well as I can, but a lot of what I'll say will refer to this photograph. So here, my grandmother is at the center of the photo. She's with my mother and sister, as well as aunts and cousins, sorry. This photo was taken in the early 1990s in Oregon, where my grandparents had a great farm. And it looks like this photo was taken because my aunt and uncle were visiting from Korea, and you might be able to recognize me. I'm the one on the very left with the haircut. And a resonant theme of this photo that I'd like to highlight is the reproductive labor and the resilience of the women in my family. So the story that's often told about my grandmother is that she had lost everything during the war and got married to my farmer grandfather because she was hungry and in search of safe shelter outside of Seoul, where she's from. When the war broke out, my grandmother never saw her father again, and he'd been traveling in the north. And it's likely that the border closed while he was still trying to get home. So as a child, I thought that I only saw glimpses of how the war touched my family. The memories were largely kept locked away, and they only found light when my family got together at reunions like the one that's photographed here. So after my grandfather had lost his farm in Korea, he was sponsored by his sister to move to the States. But when he moved to the States, he moved alone at first, which left my grandmother to take on a full-time job outside the home for the first time, working and solo parenting, while my high school-aged mother took care of her siblings. My parents and I moved to Oregon in 1990, and we were later joined by my grandmother, a lot of aunts, uncles, and cousins. And we were reunited with my grandfather as he set up his new farm. For a short time, my parents and I actually lived in the attic of that farmhouse in the photo. And before we moved to New York, this farm was a weekly refuge and a place for many family reunions. Sometimes at these reunions, I got to stay up late with the adults, which is when the fun began. So when they drank, sang, and played cards, I got to keep score and listen. They told stories that often hinted at and spoke of the ongoing war, dictatorships, uprisings, and social movements. And it also included stories about how my family were affected and also participated in them. My father was a student activist in the 1980s. And when my parents were dating, my father had to go underground to keep himself and the people around him safe. So when they decided that they'd get married, some of my relatives were tentative because student activism was dangerous during this era of intense political repression. There's a long list of pain that led the different members of my family to migrate. My grandfather had lost his farm. There was also political repression, domestic violence, lost loved ones. And here in the photo that you just saw, you see documented, undocumented immigrants, kyopos, and also just visiting people like my aunt and cousins who were visiting from Korea. So in my family, the war led to multiple migrations, which is also where I enter in this Korean War story. Remembering the farm in Oregon, I remember it as a place of healing where we could nourish each other and also where we could create joy and new memories that refused to allow the violence of war to seep in. My grandmother used to say that she was the happiest when she lived on this farm. And I think by that she meant that it was a time and place when things could feel light in spite of the past. And so while this photo is about a family reunion, I also want to point out that its negative is family separation. The war has separated families in more ways than one, with and beyond the DMZ. After my grandmother's migration, she never got to see her brother again. It was too far and too expensive to go back. My family's migration also means that I'm closer to my mother's family, who had the means and the will to move to the US, while my father's family stayed in rural Korea. Separations also embedded in the land that's photographed. The land where my family's farm stood was separated from the Kalapuya people who had cared for this land before the US forcibly removed and relocated them in the mid-19th century. The lands became agricultural homesteads for white settlers, and to understand my family's story in relation to this history reveals another layer of the US that to me clarifies the ongoing nature of the Korean War. And so I'm grateful for this storytelling event because part of our healing is to bear witness to the human impacts of war and militarism. Thank you.
Minju's story brings up the important history of migration. Most Koreans who make their home outside the Korean peninsula can trace their migration to Japanese colonialism, division, and war. And her story also highlights some of the ways that Koreans heal from that traumatic history. We continue these themes with Aiyoung's story.
Sorry, hang on just one sec. We're unmuting Aiyoung's phone.
Okay. It has its own mind. To everyone, I need, yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Aiyoung. You should be good to go.
I'm muted. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
My story starts.
Sorry, hey tech team, just a quick logistical thing. We have to keep Aiyoung's video muted and her phone unmuted. So please do not unmute her video because of the tech piece. Okay, so the phone should be.
Okay. My story starts with two flashbacks. First, it's when I am 5 years old in Shanghai, and it's 1945. The World War II has ended. Then we flash forward 5 more years. I'm 10 years old now in Taiwan when the Korean War breaks out. This photo that you see is of my family in Shanghai in 1945 with my mother and father, my younger brother, and my sister. Soon after I was born in Hamhung, a small coastal town in what is now North Korea, our family moved to Shanghai. And there, at age 5, I witnessed the end of World War II and the unbridled joy of Korea's liberation from Japan after 35 years of brutal colonization. My 5-year-old eyes watched as throngs of people came to our house, shouting "Manse, Manse" at the top of their lungs. And for days afterwards, my father scoured the Chinese countryside looking for young Korean men, actually mostly in their teens, 14, 15, 16. They were conscripted by the Japanese government to work in the military camps. And in their surrender and hasty retreat, the young boys had been left abandoned to fend for themselves. Day after day, my father brought dozens of these bewildered, dirty, hungry boys to our home. And my mother gave them baths, food, clean clothes, and a place to sleep. The next day, my father was on the Voice of America, solemnly calling out each boy's name, his age, and his hometown. And until that very moment, all their families back home had no idea if, after all this time, their sons were even alive. Finally, on the day they went to board their ship home, each boy was clutching a small Korean flag that fluttered in the wind as their eyes filled with tears, thinking of home. The ladies in the independence movement in Shanghai had made those flags. And one day, my mother just went over to the piano and spontaneously wrote Haebang e Nore, which is a song of liberation. It went viral and was sung by Koreans all over the world. Tragically, Korea independence was short-lived. One peninsula, our peninsula, was divided at the 38th parallel by the US and the Soviet Union, creating South Korea and North Korea. Cold War politics and hostilities took hold, and on June 25, 1950, the Korean War broke out. I was 10 years old, and we had moved to Taiwan by then. Every day, we listened anxiously to the news on our shortwave radio. And then one day we learned that my maternal grandfather, a Presbyterian minister who had studied at the Chicago Theological Seminary, had been taken and was not heard from ever again. Chaos reigned. All our relatives fled to Seoul, and our family lost everything. As the war went on, my mother's lifelong dream of going home again disintegrated. When the fighting finally ended, the UN Korea Reconstruction Agency, UNCRA, sent my father to restore the waterworks in Seoul. There was no water in the entire city of Seoul. And so that he could be closer to his work in Korea, we moved from Taiwan to Japan in late 1953. Now we fast forward to the present. 5 years ago today, I crossed the DMZ from North Korea to South Korea with 30 international women peace activists. We walked to call for an end to the Korean War, unite separated families, and assure women's leadership in peacemaking. All the wonderful and unexpected encounters I had with my North Korean and South Korean sisters on this life-changing journey, and the reflection of myself that I saw in each of them, made it so clear to me that although I have wandered far and wide all these years, Korea is my homeland. And so for my father's passionate dedication to rebuilding our torn country after the war, and to my mother's lifelong love and yearning to go home again, I am committed to finding a path to peace in Korea and my way back home. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aiyoung, for your story. Building peace in Korea has been an important response to trauma, both direct and as a legacy. That's great. Approaching it from her perspective, young adult. Our next speaker is Grace Choi, and she approaches this subject from her perspective as a young adult educated in a divided Korea. Her story is also quite remarkable. Grace?
Yes, thank you. First, for those of you who are 35 years and younger, could you please wave your hand or leave us a comment down below? It will be very encouraging for us to see your presence. All right. I was born in US in 1987. A year later, my family moved to Japan for several years and then settled in Korea. So I grew up receiving K-12 education in South Korea as well as college education. The public curriculum in South Korea when I was growing up taught that North Korea is the main enemy of South Korea. I remember that we were taught with the propagandized story of Lee Seung-bok, a victim that was killed by the North Korean Special Force in the late 60s, and how he so boldly declared, "I hate the Communist Party," and thus was brutally killed. We were taught to follow the brave child's footsteps of defying communism, even to death. The schools held anti-communist propaganda making contests, and we drew flyers with anti-communist slogans. The traumas of the ongoing war left the country divided. The conservatives capitalized and mobilized support on the platform of anti-communism, and framed the opposition as pro-communists. Even I had prejudices against my late grandfather-in-law, President Kim Dae-jung, as he was labeled by the dictators as a communist instigator. I personally had a very difficult time convincing my parents and relatives when getting married because of this reason, since my family also had very similar prejudices. So living with anti-communist rhetoric and propaganda was the norm for both older and younger generations of South Korea. Still, reunification was relevant to the older generation because they at least have memories of Korea before the division, or have relatives in North Korea, or at least know relatives that are separated by the division. They still have the longing to see the reunified Korea. However, younger generations, like me, don't have memories of one Korea. They don't have any relatives in North Korea or know anyone who has relatives in North Korea. North Korea seen on TV is such a bizarre and abnormal country with a theocratic regime and filled with brainwashed people. So the younger generation questions, why should we reunify with North Korea? Can we just live as different nations? Therefore, the old logic of we should reunify because we are 한민족, which means one ethnic people, has no ring to our generation. That logic is not only outdated, but also inaccurate and dangerous, because that logic is only inclusive to a certain category of people living in South Korea, while many different ethnicities, cultures, and races coexist in Korea. Instead, we need a new vision, a vision of reunification that is not only for the Korean people, but vision of reunification for humanity. A vision of peace that not only applies to Korean people, but peace that transcends the boundaries of Korean Peninsula and also the boundaries of race. What motivates us is not the appeal to the 한민족 or oneness of race, but rather a larger vision that is more inclusive, based on more universal value of human rights, equality, and justice. So that reunification is welcomed also outside of Korea, and Korea being a refuge for people searching for a hope. However, to claim this vision, we need to think outside of the box and be flexible. I believe the younger generation is better equipped to think across the political boundaries because the traumas of the Korean War are, while still there, at least less directly felt. We also should continue to raise our voice as one against all the issues against humanity and stand in solidarity against the problems not only within Korea, but also in other countries, other ethnicity, and other minorities in order to earn the rights to talk about reunification based on universal and cosmopolitan values. Because as Dr. King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. I believe the younger generation can overcome the divisions that are results of scars and traumas of the Korean War. The younger generation isn't ignorant about the issue of reunification, we just have not been given a chance yet, as our voices have been buried under the outdated framework and traumas. Thank you.
Grace's call for a new vision of reunification that goes beyond the concept of Hanminjok is a bracing one. Korea already is home to multiple ethnicities and races, including a growing population of international brides who have faced strong prejudice. Koreans themselves are diverse and include mixed race Koreans, transnational adoptees, ethnic Koreans around the world, and Koreans married to people of other races and ethnicities. How can reunification be meaningful beyond the concept of a Korean Hanminjok? This is a critical question for our generation. Grace points to the goal of a reunified Korea as a society where everyone, regardless of ethnic, racial, or geographic background, can thrive and live together. In my own research on Korean diaspora, I emphasize the need for a new understanding of peoplehood as 열린 민족, an inclusive and expansive sense of peoplehood that could embrace the full range of humanity. Perhaps that kind of a concept, the idea of 열린 민족, can be part of a new vision for a reunified Korea. We now ask our panelists to respond to some specific questions. The first one is, how has the unended Korean War affected your life? And this time, we will begin with Minju.
So my grandfather lives in LA, and my parents do as much as they can to honor his wish to live out there. They visit him every few months, call him every day. We keep up with his doctors and caregivers from afar. With the pandemic, his caregivers have suggested that my grandfather get 4 calls a day to make sure he's safe during the shelter-in-place order. And so my cousins and I had to make sure that we were consistently checking in on him. So it was a bit of a mobilized effort. He had been ill on and off for some time, and earlier this year, he actually began to have dreams about the war. And one night, his dream was so vivid that he cut himself with a pair of scissors, and he damaged the nerves in his hand. And from miles away, my extended family was reminded about the ever presence of the war. And so I think for a lot of people who experienced 1950 to 53, especially, don't like to speak about the war, and that's certainly the case for my grandfather. So when he relives those years and he tells us about those terrible dreams, we don't really know what he's referring to or what memories are really coming up, and then also how to bear witness to his pain. And while we tried to provide care from a distance, we also wondered if the ghosts of the war would ever go away, or if my grandfather would ever find peace. So to answer the question, I think the unended war impacts me as it impacts a lot of people in the diaspora. I care about my grandfather, and so when he relives his traumas, I get worried, we all get worried, which is as much a bureaucratic process of paperwork and phone calls as it is an emotional one. And then I also get angry that these realities exist, which motivates me to commit to studying militarism and imperialism, and also the multiple vectors of power that traumatize communities at all. In all of our collective haunting, I'm haunted by the traumas of war, warfare, migration, loss, separation, and silence. But I also know that it's this silence that also informs how we experience and relate to one another.
Thank you, Minju. In the interest of time, we're only going to have 2 panelists answer each question. So our second panelist for this question will be Joy. How has the unending Korean War affected your life?
Hi. The Korean War certainly has impacted on me in number of ways. The fact that I was from North, from Pyongyang, often made me the target of suspicion by people and people who met me. In such example is, as I said, when Mr. Kim died of stroke in South Korea, when he brought me, I entered WEC military nursing school. And since I had no one in South Korea and no address, I put address, Pyongyang address in Busan on my enrollment papers. I wrote down my home address in Pyongyang, and this got me into a lot of trouble. I was interrogated for 2 weeks straight. Every night at 1 a.m., 2 armed soldiers came to my room and woke me up. They flanked me on each side and led me to the basement, down a long dark hallway, into a room with 4 or 5 people in military uniforms. They all had pistols. One of them asked me repeatedly, "Are you an agent sent from North? We know the truth all about you, so you must confess." This usually lasted until 3 a.m. Then the same soldiers would take me back to my room. I only got a few hours of sleep each night. Unlike the other students, I had no family in the South who came to visit on the weekends with homemade food. I lived on salt soup and barley rice. The interrogation became worse each night. After 2 weeks, I became very weak, physically and mentally. Then one night, they said, if I don't confess, they can quietly make me disappear. I could hear them cocking their guns. I thought to myself, should I lie and confess so that I might live, or be true to myself and risk death? I made up my mind and resolved to die with honor. Then I thought, if I'm to die, I should say what's on my mind. So I tore off the military school badge from my uniform and threw my head on the ground. And I said, is your behavior better than what you think of the people in the North? You wear the same uniform as me. If you shoot me dead, you would be killing a colleague. Go ahead and shoot. I was ready and waiting for the gunshot. I refused to be blindfolded and looked them straight in the eyes as I wanted to see their face as they shot me. The person holding the pistol slowly put it down and locked it. No one moved or said anything for a long time. Then finally, one of them said, Cadet Lee, we are very sorry. If you don't do this, we'll be infiltrated by the North Korean agent. Please go back and concentrate on your study. This wouldn't happen again. So I did and graduated as the valedictorian of the training school. But this mark of being a potential agent from the North followed me for often. My story is just one of many stories of people around the world, I think, whose lives have been turned upside down by the war. I am one of the lucky ones who have survived. I tell my story as I feel it is first my duty to educate by sharing about the horrible human cost of war.
Joy's experience is so frightening for us to hear. How much more frightening it must have been for her. Joy, we are so thankful that you are here to share with us your stories. Divisions by political ideology still strongly influence Korean society, both on the peninsula and in diaspora communities. In such a situation, peace is too often framed as pro-North Korea. So our second question is directly relevant to that situation. How have you been raising your voice and participating for peace in Korea? All four of our panelists have been active in movements for peace. We will hear from two of them today. First from Aiyoung, and then from Minju.
Hi, I am using my phone because of the incredible problem I'm having with an unstable internet. So sorry for doing this.
I got muted again. Okay.
I got muted again. Okay.
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 Unmute.
We can hear you.
Okay. Can
We
you
can
hear me
you.
now?
Okay, yes.
Can you hear me
Now
now?
I became
Now-
unmuted. Finally got unmuted. Okay. So in 2015, when I walked with the 30 international peace activists in North Korea, we spent 4 days in Pyongyang, attending meetings and conferences and going to visit all the sites, museums, hospitals, factories, schools, and touring the countryside. We were always accompanied by local minders who stuck very close to us all the time, made sure that everything was okay, and whatever we needed, they would want to take care of. So I cherish the time I spent with my minder on many long bus rides. I got a rare glimpse into the daily life of a young North Korean woman and her hopes and dreams, and surprisingly, we had some really candid conversations. I learned that one of her most fervent dreams and wishes was to be able to go down to South Korea, up and down, visit Seoul. That was one of her biggest dreams. And for that to be possible, for her and for countless others who decry borders and walls, we must end the Korean War. So I joined the board of Women Cross DMZ, whose mission is to create a path to peace in Korea. Last fall, in partnership with several other peace organizations, we launched the campaign, Korea Peace Now, with an exclamation point. It's a global campaign that has received broad attention, including in the U.S. Congress and at the United Nations. Our main focus is to turn U.S. policy away from the language of war and toward diplomacy to end the Korean War. For this work, we have an amazing team of dedicated professionals who do policy and legal analysis, media and outreach, organizing Korea Peace chapters across the U.S., and lobbying our legislators in Washington, D.C. That is the main thing that we do these days. We have helped draft several resolutions that have been introduced in Congress, and as Representative Grace Meng said, we've been working closely together, and we are grateful for her championing our cause. And we continue to write articles, op-eds, and make public statements, and we speak at international and regional conferences, on campuses, at churches and community centers, wherever and whenever we can find a podium to talk about the urgent need for lasting peace and reconciliation on the Korean Peninsula. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Aiyoung. We now turn to Minju and ask, how have you been raising your voice and participating for peace in Korea?
To answer this question, I'm a member of Nodutor, which is a New York-based organization of diasporic Koreans and comrades working to advance peace, decolonization, and self-determination in Korea, as well as on Turtle Island or North America. So in Nodutor, we recognize the critical need to see the connections between global and local forms of state-sponsored violence. The US uses its military as a global police force under the guise of safety and democracy. And we've seen this in the Philippines at the turn of the 20th century, as well as in the way that the US enacts violence against indigenous nations and communities, as well as also in the policing of Black communities in the US. So consequently, the ongoing struggle for Korean peace is connected to the calls to abolish the police, which we see as a tool of US imperial dominance. And so recently we've been participating in the uprisings for Black liberation, calling for the abolition of the police alongside the abolition of the military. So we do a lot of things, and this is just one of the important aspects of our work, to be in connection and solidarity with people living under the threat of US military power or other forms of imperial violence. I'm also an educator, and I write and teach about how power functions in the United States. The US acts as the moral and political arbiter for what constitutes as freedom and democracy in order to justify the US's continued presence in the Pacific. So in South Korea, this translates to more US interventionism and military occupation. For example, with THAAD in Seongju under the alleged threat of the DPRK, or how the US shores up weapons on stolen lands of Gwahan or Guam and throughout the Pacific. And so I try to teach and write to pull the curtain on US empire. So overall, I try to participate by being loud about how white supremacist violence operates here and abroad. And so that we can learn how to dismantle it and secure the conditions for a true Korean peace.
You for this. It's really inspiring how you've been able to put together and connect the movement for peace in Korea along with the Black Lives Matter movement. So in the interest of time, we're actually going to wrap up our panel. And I just want to say a couple of things, right? The narratives that we've heard from these four women, they're highly individual, but they're also part of a larger ongoing history of national division and war. The human toll, as they shared with us, is immeasurable. And I know that our hearts were breaking as we listened to their stories, but their stories also illuminate an indomitable human spirit. They speak to an ongoing history of collective efforts for peace and reunification, to the persistent practice of hope for a better world. So let us hold that hope in our hearts and practice it in our lives. Let us envision a reunified Korea that can help bring about a more just and peaceful world for everybody. So no matter our differences, let us hold hands and go toward that vision together. 같이 갑시다, 통일로. 같이 갑시다, 평화로.
Thank you so much, Jian. Thank you so much, panelists. We really, really appreciate hearing from each of you. That was really powerful and moving. And we do know that, you know, everyone's learning in this new digital age, being in the midst of multiple pandemics. And so we appreciate everyone's patience with the technical issues. Those issues have also led us to be a little bit past the time stamp that we wanted to be at. And so without further ado, we wanted to share a video compilation. So Echo, if you can start to pull that up, of a song called Kaja Tongildo, which roughly translates to Let's Go 통일. Members of the Korea Peace Now Grassroots Network collectively created this video. So we hope that you enjoy.
뭉클였던 호랑이 기지개 견다 온 나라 산천초목 설레인다 억눌리고 짓밟힌 세월을 끊어버리고 백두에서 한라까지 꿈틀거린다
Okay. So Echo had said in the chat, and I think it's true, doesn't it feel like everyone was singing it live, like we were together in an event in real life? So thank you to everyone who contributed, sent submissions. Thank you also to the team who compiled and put the video together. We were going to do, to share information about our virtual vigil, which is online. So that is going to be dropped in the chat, the link to it. We encourage folks to take a look. Oh, Echo is pulling it up actually on the screen. We're still taking submissions for this site. Folks are welcome to tell a little bit about their stories. Echo, can you scroll down? Or are you able? I don't know. Oh, wow. Anyway, Hyun just dropped the link to that in the chat, so please feel free to share your story and to also read the stories of folks who submitted their stories. Thank you so much, Dina and Joe, for volunteering to share your stories tonight. And just due to time, we're gonna move into the closing out of this event. We invite you to please stay with us as we close out and get your signs ready if you have them for a group photo at the end. And so the stories and the commentary that you've heard today illustrate very clearly the human cost of this unending Korean War. It has been 70 years, and we held this event today because it is time to end it. What does ending the Korean War mean to you? What do you commit to end the Korean War? We invite folks to write their responses to that in the chat, both on YouTube or in the Zoom chat. Hyun just dropped the prompt in the Zoom for folks. And you're welcome to write that as we start to close out. To us, ending the Korean War means a signed peace treaty. It means reunions of divided families. It means peaceful reunification of North and South Korea. What else does it mean? To me, ending the Korean War also means that we create spaces for our Korean diaspora to heal from historical trauma, that we support our communities where wars are being waged by the US currently. And speaking to what Grace was talking about a little earlier, that includes the war on Black lives from Portland, Oregon, to New York City, to places, many, many places all over the place. Enough is enough. It is time for us to get to work and to make our voices heard. We wanted to also end with a chant together. So I don't know if folks are able to unmute themselves or if the co-hosts are able to unmute all. We'll have a lot of background noise, but the chant is End the Korean War, Peace Treaty Now. So I'll lead it and we'll just say it a few times together. Again, you know, figuring out the online space is important, but feel free to unmute yourself or not. And also, yeah, to turn your videos on so that we can see everyone here together. So it's End the Korean War, Peace Treaty Now. End the Korean War,
Peace treaty
now. End the Korean War, Peace Treaty now.
End the Korean
War,
Peace
Peace
treaty
Treaty
now.
now.
And
All right.
peace.
Do it again.
Do it again, one more time. Okay, and let's do it. Do it a little bit louder. 1, 2, 3. End the Korean War. Peace Treaty now. End the Korean War. Peace Treaty now. All right. Thank you, everyone. So we're about to do the group photo. I want to give big shout outs to the planning team, to the tech team. Everyone is here today. Kelly Lee is in Toronto, Mira Kim in LA, Cholho Lee also in LA, Echo is in DC, Hyun is in Philly, Kathleen Richards, who made the flyer and promotion. I don't know where Kathleen is, but is with Women Cross DMZ. Thank you to our panelists, to Sekyo for the beautiful poem, for Congresswoman Grace Meng for joining us, and to Dina and Joe for being super flexible. So if you have a sign printed out, or if you want to have the background. Feel free to put the background, and we're gonna do a series. There's several pages. So we'll do a series of photos. You can do a tujang fist. Tujang means like struggle. It's the Korean word for struggle. But feel free to smile, you know, put your best face on, and maybe we'll do like a hana do set for each screen. Who's taking the picture? Okay, and if folks can turn their videos on also,
Yeah.
that would be great.
Can't turn on the video.
Turn on the video. Yeah, me too.
Oh, folks are unable to turn on their own video.
I can take screenshots. I
Okay,
can take
so
screenshot with my computer, but people have to turn the videos on though. I'll take one. There's 4 panels on my computer.
okay, so I'm gonna do a countdown a few different times. So just be prepared every time for a potential picture to take the video. Is everyone able now to turn their video on?
No, I cannot because it's
Yes.
it's done by the all right. Oh, okay. It's working now.
Okay, everyone's able to? All right.
It's working.
Okay, it'll be hana do set, and then photos are being taken. I'm just assuming someone else is taking the photos. Hana do set, 사진. Okay, one more time, or a few more times. Thank you for your patience. Hana do set, Korea peace now.
Korea peace now.
Peace now.
Okay, hana do set, peace treaty now.
Peace treaty now.
Ready now.
Now. Ready now.
하나, 둘, 셋. 김치.
Kimchi.
Ready now. Kimchi.
양양 김치. Okay, 하나, 둘, 셋. 평양냉면. 냉면. Okay, I think last one. Let's just do one more just in case someone needs it. 하나, 둘, 셋. Korea peace now.
Korea peace now.
Okay, can someone just confirm that we received we have all the pictures? Someone was taking them?
As a gallery view. Somebody else.
프로님 맞히셨나요? 스크린샷 미라님? Okay, well, I think we're done.
Hi, this is Saki from New York. I took some screenshots. If you give me, I can send them to the email if you want.
Thank you.
미라님 스크린샷 다 하셨어요?
철호님이 하셨대요.
아, 네.
Okay.
Yeah, we're done.
Can we pause now? We're gonna turn off the YouTube.
Okay, thank you so much everyone for joining.